The following readings are from a book by Charles Bell, and this book is all about the 13th Dalai Lama. But I thought I'd do these few chapters because I thought they were quite important into the understanding of what Buddhism is. So this is chapter 25 from the Portrait of a Dalai Lama, and chapter 25 is titled Gautama the Buddha. The Dalai Lama was not only the autocrat of the state, he was the autocrat of the church also. As already mentioned, he was regarded as a deity, being an incarnation of Chen Rizig, the Buddha of compassion. As Chen Rizig is regarded as Tibet's patron deity, this gave the Dalai Lama an overpowering position in Tibet. Since religion is to the ordinary Tibetan the most important object of life, let us consider what are the main features of Buddhism. Gautama, the founder of Buddhism, was born a noble prince during the 6th century BC in Sakya, a small aristocratic republic which lay in what is now Nepal. The kingdom of Nepal is inhabited by tribes, most of which are of Tibetan, not Indian origin. In those days the population was probably still more strongly Tibetan, for the Tibetans were then a pushing nation and were descending down the Himalayan barrier into the plains of northeastern India. Even at the present time, the population of Nepal is more than 80% Mongoloid, and these speak dialects akin to Tibetan. So the historical Buddha may well have been Mongoloid, perhaps Tibetan, rather than Indian by race. Besides, as that outstanding authority, Sir Charles Eliot, pointed out, quote, "The elementary simplicity of Buddhist principles, namely that religion is open to all and identical with morality, made a clean sweep of Brahmanic theology and sacrifices, and put in its place something like Confucianism. Confucius lived shortly before Buddha." End quote. Eliot continues, "But the innate Indian love for philosophizing and ritual caused generation after generation to add more and more supplements to the master's teaching, and it is only outside India that it has been preserved in any purity." End quote. Although Buddha Shakyamuni may well have been Mongolian, rather than Indian, by race, his work lay among Indians. His youth was spent on or near the border, and his later life in the interior of India, so his environment was mainly Indian. Gautama's father was a leading man, perhaps the leading man in the Sakyan Republic. As a young man, Gautama came to learn of the sorrows of life, illness, old age, and death. His feelings at this time he described later on to his disciples. He himself was rich and comfortable, but he reflected how people feel repulsion and disgust at the sight of old age, sickness, and death. But was this right? I also, he thought, am subject to decay, and am not free from the power of old age, sickness, and death. Is it right that I should feel horror, repulsion, and disgust when I see another in such plight? And when I reflected thus, my disciples, all the joy which there is in life, died within me. When 29 years of age, he left his luxurious home and lived a life of stern asceticism, seeking always the riddle of existence. He continued this for 6 years, till he was at death's door. But the truth lay not this way. He recalled then how in his earlier youth he had sat in the shade of a rose-apple tree, and entered into the stage of contemplation known as the first absorption. So he took food to recover his strength, and passed through successive stages of contemplation. He obtained a vision in which he saw the whole universe as a system of cause and effect and rebirth. Finally, he understood the truth of suffering and the cause of suffering, the cessation of suffering, and the path that led to that cessation. In me, thus set free, the knowledge of freedom arose, and I knew cyclic rebirth has been destroyed, the higher life has been gained, what has to be done has been done. I have no more to do with this ordinary world. This third knowledge came to me in the last watch of the night. Ignorance was destroyed, knowledge had arisen, darkness was destroyed, light had arisen, as I sat there, earnest, strenuous, resolute. He was now 35 years old. His enlightenment came at a place 6 miles from Gaya, the second largest city in the modern province of Bihar, in northern India. He was sitting under a large tree of the fig family, known to Indians as pipal. You will still find there a pipal tree, which claims to be a lineal descendant of the tree under which Gautama sat. It is known as the Bodhi tree, the tree of enlightenment, and near it is the Bodhi Gaya temple, where you may meet Buddhists from Tibet, Burma, Ceylon, Japan, and other countries. It is strange that more tourists to India do not visit this place where Buddhism was born. A good road connected it with the railway at Gaya, when I used to visit the spot, and presumably still does. Gautama thus became Buddha Shakyamuni, the Enlightened One. A few weeks later he preached his first sermon in the deer park at Benares. 5 recluses, who had left him when he abandoned the ascetic life, listened to him. In this sermon he begins by saying that those who wish to follow religion must follow the middle way, avoiding self-indulgence on the one side and self-mortification on the other. The first is low, the second is crazy. Neither of the two is the religious life. There is a middle way, O recluses, he says, avoiding these 2 extremes. And which is that middle way? Verily it is the noble eightfold path, that is to say, right views, free from superstition or delusion, right aspirations, high and worthy of the intelligent, earnest person, right speech, kindly, open, truthful, right conduct, peaceful, honest, pure, right livelihood, bringing hurt or danger to no living thing, real effort in training and in self-control, right mindfulness, the active, watchful mind, right concentration, in deep meditation on the truth of reality. He then enunciated the 4 noble truths, which may be summarized as suffering, the cause of suffering, the cessation of suffering, and the method of effecting that cessation. The cause of suffering is first, the craving for the gratification of the passions, or the craving for the future life, or the craving for success in this present life. And the way that leads to the cessation of this suffering is the Noble Eightfold Path. It will be noticed that this is a religion of conduct, not merely of belief. Faith alone is not sufficient. By their fruits ye shall know them. And we have here a religion that is intellectual rather than emotional. The cause of suffering is desire. This desire is due to ignorance. The thirst for the things of life causes rebirth after rebirth. The nature of this craving is explained in the chain of dependent relationship, of which we need only say that ignorance is the first cause, leading on through consciousness, contact, sensation, craving, and other links to birth and death. By ignorance appears to be meant ignorance of the true nature of reality and true interests of all beings. We were born into the world because of our ignorance in our last birth, and because of the desire for re-existence which was in us when we died. Having followed the perfect path, the Buddhist can attain the status of an arhat, and further can attain final enlightenment. This was the aim of Buddha. Wandering over a part of northern India, now comprised in Bihar and Uttar Pradesh, Buddha preached for some 45 years, until his 80th year, moving from place to place, preaching to the people, but still more instructing his own disciples, building up and strengthening the religious communities, and deciding each difficulty as it arose. The days passed by. We seem to see a picture of one who was tolerant but authoritative, a born leader with a compelling personal charm of his own. His teaching did not arouse violent opposition, though it differed so greatly from the varying Hindu doctrines of the time. He did not denounce the Brahmins as a class. Indeed, he was singularly gentle and tolerant. When he converted a general who had been a Jain, he permitted him to continue to give food to the Jain monks who came to him. He sat by the sacred fire of a Brahmin and discoursed, but did not denounce the worship which the Brahmin carried on. Among laymen, Buddha prescribed abstinence from the 5 sins of taking life, drinking intoxicants, lying, stealing, and unchastity. And they were to strive for pleasant speech, kindness, temperance, consideration for others, and love. The aim was to be free from the round of worldly existences, to escape from the will. Each must work out his or her own salvation. Buddha acknowledged no God-creator. The religious order, or Sangha, which Buddha founded, grew stronger and stronger and became the dominant religion in India for several centuries. Later on it became mixed with Hinduism and animism, and was replaced by Hinduism, though the power of Buddhism lingered on in all places till the 12th century AD. Chapter 26. What is Tibetan Buddhism? Buddhism came strongly to Tibet in the 8th century AD. It was then mixed with Hinduism, the worship of male and female deities, magical charms, and so on. At that time the Tibetan religion, called Bon, was based largely on worship of the forces of nature. But it was more than mere nature worship. It was strongly organized and resisted the newcomer for a long time. Buddhism succeeded only by compromising with Bon, adopting many of its ideas. Tibetan Buddhism is the result, and it has the strength belonging to all genuine expressions of the national character. The Tibetans found they could not do without somebody to worship, so they venerated Buddha and various deities who, as the new teachers told them, were emanations of Buddha. Monasteries and nunneries were formed. They grew and grew. This race of soldiers and raiders fought no longer in the material world. They became monks and fought instead the evil forces around them. There is much that is mechanical in Tibetan Buddhism. Prayers are written on strips of paper and enclosed in little wheels that are turned by the hand. Large cylinders are turned by the hand or even driven by water power, each containing many thousands of prayers and sacred writings. If you ask an intelligent monk what good there can be in machine-made prayer, he would answer, "Turning a prayer wheel is in itself of no use, unless the person turning it concentrates his mind on good thoughts, thinking kindly of all beings, and how he may help those who are in trouble. That is the role of the prayer wheel, and its kindred. By no other means are the thoughts, especially of an uneducated person, so likely to be guided. It is the thoughts that are all important." The rosary is in general use throughout Tibet among men, women, and children, monks and nuns and laity. Each rosary should have 108 beads, the Tibetan sacred number. The prayer wheel and the rosary, these the people carry everywhere, the former often in the right hand, the latter round the wrist of the left. The old sects of the priesthood are allowed to marry and to drink wine, but many abstain from both marriage and liquor. Those ordained within the Reformed sects, which were inaugurated 500 years ago, neither drink wine nor consort with the opposite sex. None of the clergy are allowed to eat onions or garlic on the ground that they emit a bad smell from the mouth and make the air impure. A monk who takes garlic is not allowed even to put out a fire. The clergy are allowed to take fish, pork, and eggs, but some abstain, as they believe that there is something holy underneath the skin of these. But the two things most strongly prohibited to the Reformed sect, besides dealing with the opposite sex, are alcohol and tobacco. These are said to be the favourites of the devils. Tobacco is looked on as far worse than alcohol. The Dalai Lama was strongly against it and forbade it, not only to all those ordained, but to all the laity as well. The history of Bhutan, written long ago, attacks smoking violently. The Tibetan biography, too, is violent in its attack. It says, "There is no doubt that this plant is the cause of the destruction of India by the heathen." Some Tibetans do indeed smoke, usually pipes with long stems and tiny bowls, but they smoke less than Indians do, and far less than the Nepalese. The Dalai Lama prohibited the sending of tobacco by post in Tibet and the sale of it in Lhasa. He prohibited smoking privately as well as openly. Officers searched out all the tobacco and, mixing it with dirt to make it rot quickly, buried it in a pit in the sight of the public. The people believe implicitly in the lamas and call them in for spiritual help and for medical help too, for illnesses are as a rule ascribed to the action of evil spirits. It is the monks and nuns who go to the temple rather than the laity, for they have 3 to 5 services daily in their monasteries, lasting 4 or 5 hours altogether. The sacred books are intoned, tea is brought round at intervals, and to the onlooker it all seems very mechanical. But one always has to remember that Tibetan minds differ greatly from ours, and they find in these services a deep, unseen influence which goes out and does good to all living beings, that is to say, human beings and all the animal world. The monks and nuns pray for all of these. And what effect does their religion have on the Tibetans? Their wholehearted belief in it may be seen in the fact that several thousands of them have lived for a long time in districts in India where there are many Christian missionaries, Indian Gurkhas, and others converted, but of Tibetans only an infinitesimal number. Fear, no doubt, is an ingredient in a Tibetan's faith, but no more than it is with a believing Christian. They are more happy and carefree than the peoples of Europe or America. Their main characteristics have been described in some detail in the first chapter of this book. Their religion puts a background of confidence into the Tibetan's life. They turn naturally to the lamas as their spiritual guides and helpers in times of joy, but especially in the times of trouble. No doubt the ordinary people hope to gain spiritual advantage from any good that they do, but so do those in all religions. The advantage for which the Tibetan hopes is a better rebirth in his next life, and best of all as a monk or nun in a Buddhist land, so that they may be able to follow the faith more devotedly. The laity visit the temples and their own village chapels, especially on holy days, when they burn little lamps fed with butter, as offerings for the dead and for the living. They bow down before the images and throw white silk scarfs over them, reciting prayers and passages from the sacred books as they do so. And most of all do they flock to the temples to witness the gorgeous ritual, with many resemblances to that of the Roman Catholic Church, and the ceremonies of this complicated religion. Here they receive interest and amusement, as well as religious instruction. They have no cinemas, and for theatres only occasional strolling players. The plays in the temples help to take the place of the theatres. All have a strong moral basis, with clowning and farce thrown in, for this laughter-loving race need their jokes when sitting through an 8-hour performance. To the Christian, love is the higher virtue, to the Buddhist, wisdom. For, with the Buddha, they hold that ignorance is the root of all evil. This idea permeates all classes in Tibet. Even the beggar soliciting alms will not address you as kind gentleman, but as learned sir. Love, however, ranks very high. There is no poorhouse or unemployment insurance, but no poor man, woman, or child will starve. Others will help as a matter of course. The lamas, monks, and nuns lead hard, austere lives. So much is this the case that few of the wealthier classes embrace the monastic life, except such as are recognized as incarnations of those saints, and others who have attained to Buddhahood in previous lives, and therefore are on the earth only through their own unselfishness. Of these there are several hundred, and they live more softly than the ordinary monk, each taking the headship of the monastery ruled by the former incarnation. Almost all the people pray. Children of 5 years old often learn long prayers by heart. It must be admitted that they, and even many adults, are ignorant of the meaning of much that is in the prayers, for Tibetan education is primitive. But even these prayers turn their thoughts to higher things. Many laymen pray for more than an hour daily, part in the early morning, part in the evening, and some for 3 hours or more. The Prime Minister, in spite of his heavy work, prayed and read the sacred books for 4 hours daily. They pray for all human beings, birds, beasts, fishes, the whole animate creation in all countries of the world. They pray that the crops may be good everywhere, that men may not fight and kill each other, but that peace may flourish throughout the world, and so on and so on. They are told not to pray for themselves individually, since in praying for all they thereby pray for themselves. But undoubtedly many do pray specifically for themselves. They are told not to pray when the mind is angry. It is better to lie down with a mind at ease than to sit like Buddha and pray with an angry mind. As for the Prime Minister, that experienced old administrator, his verdict was, quote, "There are in Tibet a very large number of monasteries and nunneries and innumerable monks and nuns. But the whole of their religion is summed up in this short verse that every Tibetan knows. Taking yourself as an example, do good, not harm to others. This, just this, is Buddha's teachings." End quote. He added, "Our Buddhist religion is found in that saying much more than in the temples or monasteries. In fact, as ye would that men should do to you, do ye also to them likewise." End quote. No doubt it would be easy to criticize much in the lives of Tibetans, but they find it equally easy to criticize us. After I'd left Tibet, Pal Easy spent a year with me in England. When the year was ending, I asked him to speak frankly on what he considered the defects among English people. Among other criticisms, he said, quote, "I read in the papers of cases in which husbands and wives kill each other. Such cases are practically unknown in Tibet. Children sometimes strike and even kill their parents. No Tibetan child would do that. Children should regard their father as they regard the three precious ones, Buddha, the Buddhist scripture, and the spiritual community. People are happier in Tibet than they seem to be in England. Everybody in my country can get work and earn his little earning. Having done so, men and women sing and dance and play, for the people say, 'Death comes later, to be happy even for one day is a profit taken.' So people work a bit and play a bit and practice religion, all free. Here in England people do not seem very happy. They are so often thinking how they can add to their money, so often they are full of anxiety. Amusements are set out everywhere, and the people go crowded into them, but they are mostly expensive. In Tibet we sing and dance, and it costs the party nothing except a few pence for beer. In England people must always be thinking of earning money to pay for their dwelling, their food, and their amusement. In Tibet, out of happiness, many sing as they work. I do not find that here in England. Well, every country has its own customs. There is one thing in England, among many others, that all must admire, and that is the administration of justice, which is straightforward and equal for those of high and those of low position." End quote. In Tibet I used to be told, quote, "Our Tibetan monks regard Europeans and Americans as having very little religion. They have often been informed that these frequently make war and kill many people, and taking life is one of the worst possible sins. Their churches are poorly attended, they worship but little. Instead of worshipping, they go off to their places of amusement." End quote. Tibetans regard prayers, reading the sacred books, making certain religious offerings, going round a holy road in the neighbourhood, and such like acts, as included in the most important part of religion. An example of such religious offerings is when beer or tea is offered to deities, beer for some, tea for others. Such offerings are made to accompany prayers on various subjects, e.g. before a man starts on a journey, or before a boy goes in for an examination. Holy roads are found in most places. Maybe it is a path going round a monastery. The chief of them all is the one which goes round the holy city of Lhasa, 4.5 miles in its circuit. But a merciful good life is even more important than prayers or religious offerings. It is the state of the mind that matters. Everything comes back to that. One afternoon in Lhasa, Zarong called on me. the conversation turned on the decreasing population of Tibet. Quote, "There is much empty land which ought to be cultivated," says he, "but on account of the enormous number of monks the people become less and the land goes empty." End quote. I replied, "That great power of the land is a matter of religion on which I can make no comment." With a wry smile he answered, "It is indeed a fundamental matter of religion on which I, too, can make no comment. But in the side issues the layman can step in. The young Tibetan colonel attached to my mission in Lhasa would not presume to sit down with us, when the abbot of the Tiger's Prophecy, a large monastery, called on me. But after a while he had no hesitation in telling the prelate to rise and take his leave, and the latter obeyed him. At one of the monasteries which we visited we were shown a tooth some 4 inches long, and were told that it was a tooth of Buddha himself. The same young colonel doubted its genuineness, saying, "What must have been the size of the mouth that contained teeth like that?" Yes, religion comes first in Tibet. It is at the centre of the ordinary Tibetan's life. Here is the village, named Rock, in the valley of the Zangpo, the great river of southern Tibet. Colonel Harnett and I stayed there in 1934. The landlords and the community have built a new chapel, and even poor people have contributed far more than they can afford according to Western standards. It is a solid chapel, complete with altar and images of Buddhas and saints, sacred pictures, holy water, and the little lamps fed by butter. I can testify to these things, for the villagers insisted on my lodging there, eating and sleeping and drinking alcohol if I wished. Harnett was free to do the same, though all these things were of course strictly forbidden to any Tibetan in this place of worship. And why did they insist? Because it was the cleanest and most comfortable house in the village. Such is the tolerance of Tibetan Buddhism. Tolerance allied to loving kindness, and both based on Buddhist wisdom. That perhaps is the chief reason why the middle way of Gautama the Buddha has come down through 2,500 years. Chapter 27. A God on Earth. Such is the religious atmosphere in Tibet. Where does the Dalai Lama stand in it? Of others who have led saintly lives, people will say that they are incarnations of, or emanations from, the celestial Bodhisattva Chenrezig, the Buddha of compassion. But the Dalai Lama is by far the highest of all these incarnations, and Chenrezig is not the only patron deity of Tibet. He is the reputed founder of the Tibetan race. When in the form of a monkey, Chenrezig met a she-devil. She importuned him thus: "By reason of my actions in my former life, I have been born in a demon race, and being in the power of the god of lust, I love you greatly." He consorted with her, and they had 6 children. The Tibetan Chronicle adds, "Those who took after their father were full of faith, diligence, love, and piety, and were eloquent and meek. Those who took after their mother were full of sin, contention, and jealousy, and were greedy and mischievous, but all possessed strong bodies and courage." This commencement of the Tibetan race is said to have occurred at Zetzang on the Zangpo, the great river of southern Tibet, 2 days' journey southeast of Lhasa. In 1934 I visited Zetzang. The cave where the celestial father and the she-devil lived together is a vertical cleft in the almost precipitous side of the mountain, high above the plain below. When his descendants multiplied so greatly that feeding them was difficult, the Buddha of compassion fed them on sacred grain, which, sown today, ripened tomorrow into barley. The first field to be sown is still pointed out by the inhabitants. It lies near the bank of the great river. Through eating the barley, their towers gradually disappeared. The Dalai Lama's religious position was supreme and unassailable, for, as already stated, he had power over others not only in this, but also in future lives. The popular saying runs, "The ruler in this life, the uplifter in the hereafter." He is not only higher than all human beings, he is master also of the lesser deities. The state oracle, 4 miles outside Lhasa, is the master of all the lesser deities, and this oracle is subordinate to the Dalai Lama. This is evident from the fact that when the Dalai Lama preaches his annual sermon on the day of the full moon in the first month of each year, the state oracle comes and makes his report to the Dalai Lama in the presence of a large crowd of people. He tells the Dalai Lama, "Such and such an occurrence happened, and I did so and so. Was my action suitable?" He speaks in a very low voice. Even the attendants close by hear just a hum, but do not catch the words. The Dalai Lama puts his hand to his ear and bends a little forward and hears what the oracle says and gives replies. But nobody can hear these, and later on the inmost one does not tell anybody what has been said on either side. There is no doubt that Tibetans consider the Dalai Lama to be omnipotent and omniscient, to possess all power and all knowledge. Up on the mountainsides you will often see the inscription, marked in white stones, "Praise to the all-knowing Dalai Lama." Some of the better educated Tibetans, when pressed, will say that his omniscience is limited by his sojourns on earth. They are not prepared to admit that the Dalai Lama's power is limited. If he did not adopt some remedy for a disaster, which by ordinary human reason he ought to have adopted, they will usually say that the wickedness of the world or of a section of his subjects, and his subjects are always ready to admit such reasons, made him disinclined to exercise his power. They believe that the Dalai Lama need not die until he wants to. The four that preceded the 13th all died young, a fact which foreigners not unreasonably attribute to poison. But the Tibetans do not admit this point of view, for they will say that the poison would not have killed any of them unless they had wished to pass on to the honourable field. All recognise that he can multiply his body at will, for indeed every Tulku has this power. But the late Dalai Lama, as already mentioned, condemned the use of this power unless some real necessity existed, because it causes confusion in the religious work. From time to time he was credited with the performance of certain miracles, including his footprint on a stone veranda in the temple in Lhasa, and the imprint of his wooden staff on the sacred stone path around the Ganden monastery, 27 miles from Lhasa. But one hears very little about miracles performed either by him or anybody else. It is an accepted rule in Tibet that those who work miracles, and many are accredited with the ability, should not work them unless they fulfill some useful purpose. In any case, they should not talk about them, as that would be a sign of vanity, an evil thing. In fact, a miracle worker should not only not speak of his powers, he should not exhibit them in public, just to show what he can do. Any who do this are apt to bring on themselves an injury from a spirit and shorten their lives. The Tibetan biography confirms the above views. All Tibetans believe that the Dalai Lama has the power of foretelling events. These prophecies are not blazoned out to the multitude, but people talk about them among themselves, especially when the time of fulfillment draws near. In January 1935, Paolesi mentioned to me an application made by the Royal Geographical Society June 1933 for permission to make another attempt to climb Mount Everest. He remarked, "The Tibetan government no doubt felt that the Dalai Lama would soon go to the honourable field, for the Dalai Lama himself had let this be known a year or two earlier. The Tibetan government accordingly replied, requesting that the exhibition should not be sent." And incidentally, the Dalai Lama predicted that I would visit Lhasa some years before I went there, at a time when there seemed no chance of my going. He further foretold the work that I would do in Lhasa, and in this also his prediction was accurate. A somewhat unusual example of the Dalai Lama's religious influence in Mongolia came to my notice soon after I went to Lhasa in 1920. During the course of a conversation about Mongolia, His Holiness said, "A Mongolian Lama has collected a band of men with which he harasses caravans and loots their arms and other property, so much so that Mongols are now hardly able to come to Lhasa by the overland route. This causes me loss, because the Mongols have great faith in me." The Dalai Lama's income from Mongolia was certainly large. But although he blocked the road from Mongolia to Lhasa, and thereby involved the head of the faith in pecuniary loss, This Lama robber talked of coming himself to Lhasa to visit the holy shrines and prostrate himself before this same head of the faith. Incidentally, he wished to bring 500 soldiers with him. He was told he might come, but must not bring more than 20 soldiers. There was no question of punishing the sinner for his wickedness, nor even of suggesting that such a large force of soldiers would be embarrassing in the capital. The number was limited to 20 because it would be difficult to feed them on the road. In those circumstances he did not come to Lhasa. Far away in the northeast of Tibet, the large Goluk tribe, who trade peacefully for half of the year and rob caravans for the remainder, send religious offerings to the Dalai Lama in Lhasa once every 4 or 5 years. It was hardly possible for ordinary people to travel through this brigand area, but when the Dalai Lama crossed their territory in his flight from the Young Husband expedition, they flocked to him, imploring his blessing and pouring out their presents before him. The word Golok means head turned round, i.e. a religious people. The seclusion behind which he was vowed, the mystery attaching to his person, and the miracles with which he was credited increased his influence still further. Travelling to and fro from religious festivals in his sedan chair, he was hidden from view. When presiding at the great religious festivals he could sometimes be seen, as for instance when he preached the aforesaid annual sermon in a crowded square near the temple, but mostly he was in an upper chamber unseen by the people. This does not mean that he hardly ever saw anybody. His duties as the religious and secular head of Tibet necessitated his seeing many, but on such occasions his subjects usually saw him one by one, and their heads were reverently bowed. He was seldom seen in public, and seldom seen by foreigners, except by Mongols and a few Chinese. On the whole, he was secluded far more closely than the Pope. It will be understood that his religious duties came forward not only during religious festivals and ceremonies. They claimed 4 or 5 hours out of every day, as we shall see when dealing with an ordinary day in his life. He was exceptionally learned in the religion. One who is a geshe has mastered the important branches, and they are many, of the holy books. Theology and the sacred literature are all within his sphere. Every year examinations are held for this prized position. These are attended by candidates who have been studying for 15 or 20 years, sometimes even longer. Such as pass the examination are grouped in 3 classes. The Dalai Lama, when a young man, passed in the first class, and at the top of the first class many people will say, why naturally they would be bound to do that for the young vice-regent of Buddha. But this is not so at all. Some previous Dalai Lamas were placed only in the second class, and some even only in the third. The great reformer, Tsongkhapa, the most important figure in the Tibetan religion during the last 500 years, was in the third class. The young Dalai Lama was keen. He thought that the standard for the first class, known as Larampa, was not good enough, and raised it accordingly. Nor did he allow the geshes to rest on their laurels. He would send for them from time to time and examine them to see that they were not falling back. The better geshes, if their characters were robust and trustworthy, he appointed as abbots of the different monasteries. This entailed much work on Tibet's spiritual ruler, but he found it well worth while. He was not only the first Larampa of his year, he was also highly skilled in both the metaphysical and the mystical schools. He improved the studies of the monks, he toned up the administration of the 3 seats, Sera, Drepung, and Ganden. Before his time their abbots were often ignorant and lazy, having obtained their positions through bribery. He put these through examinations and dismissed those who failed. His own studies he kept up throughout his life. Leisure was to him almost unknown. The printing of books in Tibet is a laborious process, for each letter has to be carved on a wooden block. To set up the type may require 400 or 500 thick wooden blocks with the woods carved on both sides, a lengthy task. Great care is taken to make them accurate. When a volume is to be printed, the blocks are inked over and the sheets of Tibetan paper laid on them. The sheets also are printed on both sides. Many books are written by hand. These usually are not so closely connected with the religion. The Dalai Lama's libraries were in the charge of the Servant of Philosophy, a successor of Dorjieff, who has held this post for several years. The Dalai Lama had several hundred books in his own libraries apart from the Buddhist Kangyur in 108 volumes, the commentaries in 225, and other religious works. The Servant of Philosophy was reckoned the most learned of all in the whole field of literature. What was the Dalai Lama's own attitude to his status in the Buddhist world? Did he himself believe that he was supreme among Buddhists, a god on earth? Among Tibetans and other Asiatics he claimed his supremacy in every word and deed. As for myself, it was undesirable and unnecessary for me to ask such a question. My chief duty was to promote friendship between Britain and Tibet, a duty doubly strong in these days when so many injure our fatherland by ignorant criticism of those whose forms of government or rules of conduct differ from our own. Whenever the idea was in the background of our talks, he would look at me with a deprecating smile, as much as to say, "I know I cannot expect you to believe it." And he was always ready to admit a lack of knowledge or lack of power in the presence of a few daily associates, such as the court physician. But in public it was always asserted. On the medal that he gave me it is confidently claimed. In his political testament it is placed clearly on record. The Dalai Lama was certainly interested in religions other than his own, though he probably did not know much about them, except Hinduism, and in a lesser degree that of the Mohammedans. What he chiefly wanted was that Hindus and Christians should follow their own religions devoutly, for he believed that each of these was near enough to Buddhism to be a good religion. Mohammedanism he distrusted, as do practically all Tibetan Buddhists, having heard of those Mohammedans known as Ghazis, who kill people belonging to a different religion just because they do belong to a different religion. Tibetans believe that the true spirit of religion cannot exist in anybody who is capable of taking life for such a reason. The Dalai Lama looked on the Chinese as lacking the religious spirit, but his most bitter condemnation was reserved for the Russian Bolshevists. He writes, "They have broken religion so that not even the name of it remains." Except for the hostile attitude of the Soviet towards religion, he, in common with most leading Tibetans, was fond of the Russian people. Tibetans are keen observers of character, and he and all Tibetans noted closely which of the Europeans who came to Tibet held to their own religion in word and action. In Tibet, as in India, it is the ordinary Western layman, not the minister or clergyman, who is the real Christian missionary. For by their daily lives they show what religion really means to the race.